once was an old king who was dying, and he called for his trusted servant, Faithful John. "I have no anxiety left," he said, "except about my son. He is still young and cannot always know how to conduct himself." And he made Faithful John promise to teach the prince everything he should know and be a father to him. He should show him the whole castle, all the rooms and all the treasures, but not the last chamber in the long gallery, for to see what was in that room would place him in grave danger. Faithful John pledged himself to carry out the king's wishes, even if it should cost him his life. When the king was dead and buried, and the period of mourning was over, Faithful John told the young prince, who was now king, of what he had promised his father on his deathbed. "Now is the time for you to see your inheritance," he said. He took the young king all over the castle, up and down, round and about, and opened all the rich and splendid rooms, except one. The young king wanted to know why Faithful John passed this room by, and he was told, "The king forbids it, because there is something in that room of great danger to you." The youth was not satisfied with this, and tried to open the door himself. Faithful John held him back, saying that he must keep his promise to the old king, even if it should cost him his life. But the young king insisted that the room could not harm him, and that he would have no peace day or night until he had seen it with his own eyes. Indeed, he refused to go away from the place until the door was unlocked. Faithful John, knowing what the room contained, sought out the key with a heavy and foreboding heart. Opening the door, he stepped in first, hoping to block the young man's view. But the king stood on tiptoe and saw immediately, placed in full sight, the portrait of the Princess of the Golden Dawn. The picture shone with gold and precious jewels, and the face was so beautiful that anyone who saw it fell utterly in love. The young king was dazzled and sank to the ground in a dead faint. Faithful John took him up, carried him to his bed, and sorrowfully murmured, "The misfortune is now upon us. What will become of me?" He strengthened the young king with wine, and the first words he spoke with a deep sigh. "Who is she?" When Faithful John had explained whose portrait it was, he said, "My love for her is so great that if all the leaves on the trees were tongues, they could not declare it." He said he would stake his life on winning her, and that Faithful John must help him. Now, Faithful John knew it was well nigh impossible to gain access to the Princess of the Golden Dawn, but he also knew that she loved to surround herself with objects made of gold. All her tables, chairs, bowls, goblets, and other household furnishings were made of gold. "In your treasury are 5 tons of gold," he told the young king. "Let the goldsmiths fashion it into all manners of vessels and utensils, into all kinds of birds and strange animals, such as may please the princess, and we will go to her with them and try our luck." The goldsmiths worked night and day. The ship was made ready. Faithful John and the king disguised themselves as merchants, and they set out on the long voyage to the kingdom of the Golden Dawn. When they finally arrived, Faithful John gathered a sample of the golden treasure, bade the king to prepare the ship and treasure for display to the princess, and went up to the castle. In the courtyard, he saw a servant girl drawing water from the well. As he expected, the buckets in her hands were made of gold. He showed her samples of the gold objects they had brought, and she took him immediately to her mistress. When the king's daughter saw the wares, she was quite delighted and said, "They are so beautifully worked. I will buy them all from you." "Ah," said Faithful John, "what I have here is nothing compared with what my master has on board ship. They are the most artistic and valuable things ever created in gold. When she wanted to have them brought up to her, he said that it would take many days to do that. And really, her house was not big enough for everything. Then her curiosity and longing were so excited, she agreed to go and see such things for herself. As the princess approached the ship, the king could hardly greet her, for she was even more beautiful than her portrait. Gaining his composure, he ushered her below and began showing her the lovely golden objects. She was delighted with everything. Meanwhile, faithful John had stayed on deck, ordering the ship to be put out to sea. Quietly, he told the helmsman, "Set all sail till it fly like a bird." The ship was far from land by the time the king had got through all the wild beasts and strange animals that so fascinated the princess that she did not notice the motion of the ship until she tired and wanted to go home. "I am betrayed," she cried out in alarm. "I have fallen into the power of a merchant. I would rather die." The king, removing his merchant's disguise, quickly took her hand and told her that he was not a merchant, that he was a king as well-born as herself. "If I have carried you away by guile," he said, "it is because of your portrait and my overpowering love for you." He told her everything that was in his heart, and she was so drawn to him that she willingly consented to be his wife. It so happened that as John sat on deck, 3 ravens landed on board the ship, and faithful John understood what they were saying to each other. "He hasn't got her yet," said the first raven. "Oh, yes, he has," said the second raven. "She is sitting there with him in the ship." "What good will that do him?" said the third. "When they reach land, a red horse will leap forward to meet him, and the prince will want to mount. But if he does, the horse will fly away with him into the air." "Is there no remedy?" asked the second raven. "Oh, yes," chimed in the first. "If someone else jumps on the horse and slays it, the young king will be saved." "But," said the third raven, "nobody knows to do that. And if they did, the king will still not gain his bride, because when they go into the castle, his wedding shirt will be laid out looking as though made of gold, but it is really pitch, and when the king puts it on, it will burn him to the bone." When the second raven asked if anything could be done about that, the first raven said that if someone wearing gloves threw the shirt in the fire, the young king would be saved. "But what's the good of that?" said the third. "If after the wedding the young queen turns pale during the dancing and falls down dead." "But if someone immediately picks her up and draws 3 drops of blood from her right breast, she will come to life again," said the first raven. "What good is that?" replied the third raven. "Whoever does that and tries to tell the young king will become stone from the crown of his head to the sole of his foot." Having said all this, the ravens flew on, leaving faithful John very pensive and sad. At length, however, he said to himself, "I will save my master, even if it bring destruction on myself." So that when they arrived on shore, and the red horse sprang forward, faithful John pushed the king aside and mounted the horse and killed it. All the court said it was shameful to kill the beautiful horse that was to have carried the king to his palace. But the king sided with faithful John. When they reached the castle, there was the wedding shirt, as the ravens foretold, looking bright and attractive. But faithful John seized it with gloves on and threw it in the fire, where it burned like pitch. Again the attendants complained, but the king defended faithful John. And now the wedding was solemnized, and the dancing began. Faithful John watched the princess all the time, and when she suddenly turned white and fell to the ground, he picked her up, carried her to the bedchamber, knelt beside her, and sucked 3 drops of blood from her right breast. And immediately she breathed again. The young king, ignorant of why Faithful John had done such a thing, had him thrown into prison. Next morning he was condemned and led to the gallows. When he stood on high and was about to be hanged, he decided to explain his actions, no matter what the consequences. "I am unjustly condemned," he cried out to the king. "I have always been true to you." Then he told what the ravens had said and why he had been obliged to do what he did. The king was instantly convinced of the truth of what Faithful John said and ordered him released. But with the last words of his explanation, Faithful John had toppled over, a stone. There followed many years of anguish for the king and queen. The king had the stone brought to his own room, and whenever he looked at it, he wept. The queen gave birth to twin sons who grew and gave their parents much joy, but their happiness was not complete. One day, while the queen was away at prayer and the children were playing beside their father, the king turned to the statue, as he often did, and sighed. "If only I could bring you to life again, Faithful John." And then, amazingly, the stone spoke to him. "You can bring me to life again if you use for that purpose what is dearest to you." The king jumped up and cried that he would give anything in the world. "Then," said the stone, "if you cut off the heads of your 2 sons with your own hand and sprinkle me with their blood, I shall be restored to life." The king was terrified at this thought, but trusting in Faithful John, who had died for him, he drew his sword and with his own hand cut off the children's heads. And when he had smeared the stone with their blood, life returned to it. Faithful John stood once more safe and sound before him. "Your trust shall not go unrewarded," he said, and took the children's heads and attached them again to their bodies. He rubbed the wounds with their blood, and they became whole and went on playing as though nothing had happened. Then the king was full of joy, and when he saw the queen coming, he hid Faithful John and the children in a big cupboard, and asked her casually if she had been at church. "Yes," she said, "I have been praying that Faithful John might be restored to us." "Dear wife," said the king, "that can be accomplished, but it will cost us our 2 little sons, whom we must sacrifice." The queen turned pale, and her heart was full of terror, but she said, "We owe this to him for his great fidelity." Then the king rejoiced that she thought as he had, and opened the cupboard and brought forth Faithful John. "God be praised, he is delivered, and we have our little sons also." And the king told how everything had occurred. And they lived together happily for the rest of their lives.